In 2019, director Noah Baumbach and star Scarlett Johansson gave the world a raw look at the world of upper crust divorce.
In 2022, we returned to the Scottish Highlands to try another single malt.
Did we ever leave the Highlands?
We were in Islay. We were in Islay.
Oh, sorry. We just haven't left Scotland this season.
No, like ever.
The film is Marriage Story.
The whiskey is the Dalmore 12.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 2019 drama. I almost said comedy. That is not at all the case.
Comedy masterpiece.
Marriage Story.
It's this and When Harry Met Sally.
A real knee slapper, this one, Brad.
It's a romp, if you will.
Oh, man. Hey, I'm a little rusty because it's been a couple weeks since we've recorded. I don't know if Film and Whiskey Nation is completely aware of our process, but we got way far ahead in recording and said, let's take a couple weeks off. And so we did, and we are just now getting back in the saddle, Brad.
We are, Bob, and I have something to tell you that I think is going to be exciting for you.
Uh-oh, what's that?
I went to the movie theaters today and watched a movie.
Hey, what'd you go see?
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Did you like it?
Bob, I will say two things about this movie. Number one, it's not a perfect film.
No, not at all.
Number two, it is a movie that justifies the existence of movies as a medium.
Yep. That is a perfect...
I mean?
Dude, I'm telling you, I'm so happy you went to see it, because I haven't even mentioned it to you in our texts, because I'm like, Brad would never go see that movie.
I had just heard such good reviews of it from some close friends of mine that I was like, I'm going to spend $5. And it was probably the best $5 I've spent in a decade.
Yeah, man. I've gone to see a few movies in the theater over the last couple weeks, and they've all been kind of action-y films. So I saw this movie from India called RRR, which was incredible. And I don't typically go see movies from India. So this was a big deal for me. This thing blew my freaking mind. And then I went to see the new Michael Bay movie, Ambulance, which also blew my mind. Incredible movie. And then last Tuesday, I went and saw Everything Everywhere All at Once. And chef's kiss, the cinema. Am I right?
I don't want to give it away. Just go see it from the very opening shot, which is a reminiscent of Alfonso Cuarón in, what's the third Harry Potter? Prisoner of Azkaban. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Huh?
I don't remember the opening shot of the movie.
Oh my gosh, dude. The mirror.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same as Cuarón.
That's true.
In the Boggart
Yeah,
closet.
Nice. Oh, good reference. Look at you.
Dude.
I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thanks, man.
All right, we're not here to talk about that movie, though. We're here to talk about Marriage Story, which is a very different film. Very wildly different. So this is, I think, maybe the most recent film on either of our lists for season 5, right? I don't think anything else is more recent than 2019.
Bob, I think this might be the most modern movie we've ever reviewed on the podcast.
I think when we did Green Book, it was
Green Book.
Yeah, Green Book had just won the Oscar, and we were like, let's talk about that. So, I mean, we're maybe a year off the mark here with Marriage Story, but it's really cool to talk about a movie that just came out a couple years ago, and I feel like
and yet feels like it was a million years ago. Because it's still a pre-pandemic movie.
It has been a hell of a 2 years, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah, dude.
All right, let's jump right in, Brad. I think that this is going to be a very easy Brad Explains for you. If you are new to our podcast, we have a segment called Brad Explains, where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen. And Brad, because it is going to be an easy Brad Explains, let's go ahead and give a quick plug for those who are listening for the first time, or maybe longtime listeners. If you like what we do here, we would encourage you to visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/filmwhiskey, where you can support us at 3 different tiers. Become a member, if you will. From $3, $5, or $7 a month, you get tons of bonus content. There are episodes that are exclusive to Patreon subscribers. You get access to a Patreon-only Discord server that we are on every single day. Brad, it's a great time if you're a Patreon subscriber.
Yeah, you also get about an additional 10 minutes of footage on every single episode. Today, we're going to be talking about Bob and I's personal experiences with being divorced. Which is none.
Man, yeah. No experience. And it's going to be 10 minutes of silence. So yeah,
I love my life.
On that note, Brad, let's move into Brad Explains. I'm going to give you 60 seconds on the clock. I don't think you're going to need the whole thing, but can you break down the plot of Marriage Story?
Charlie and Nicole are married, and they start the film by talking about the things they love about each other, and then the rest of the film is about all the things they hate about each other, because they getting divorced, Bob. And it's ugly, and they are wealthy, and they spend all their money on divorce lawyers, and their poor son is just adorable and wants to have a normal life. And she ties his shoe in the end.
She sure does, man.
And it's nice, I guess.
I do love when you just give like these random impressionistic descriptions of moments in a movie. Like they're on the same level as the rest of the movie. You know, you're like,
I like to channel
Jurassic
my
Park
inner
is a
Van Gogh.
movie about playing God and also Jeff Goldblum's chest hair. And then like, there's just these weird little moments that you pepper in.
Yeah, dude, Brad Explains is America's favorite segment for a reason.
For a reason, man. That's for sure. All right, man, let's go ahead and jump in here. Noah Baumbach is the writer and director of this film. He is a fixture in American independent cinema as far back as, I think, 1995 was his debut film. He's made a couple movies about divorce. He's a child of divorce, and this movie kind of arose out of his own divorce and a bunch of his friends who were also kind of getting divorced at the time. And he said, like, you know, I really should make a movie where I get into the weeds about like the process of a divorce and the effect that it can have on people. And, you know, this is kind of like a subgenre of movie, Brad, that has been around for a long time. And we've talked about it a ton on this podcast, even if it's just movies that touch on it tangentially, like E.T. There's a lot of divorce movies out there if you really stop and think about it.
Yeah, at least their kid doesn't get drunk in this movie.
There's no drinking children. Also, no aliens, conspicuously in this movie. So
very obviously no aliens.
Very obvious lack of aliens in this film. So right before we started recording, I asked Brad if he had ever heard of or seen the movie Kramer versus Kramer. This is a very famous.
I 100% was super aware of the fact that it was a movie.
That it was a movie that I was referencing. This is a very famous movie from 1979. It actually won the Best Picture Oscar. Brad, it came very close to winning the Big Five, as we call them at the Oscars.
Ooh.
So, you know, the Big Five are picture, director, actor, actress, and screenplay. And it won all of those except for the lead actress in the movie, Meryl Streep, was actually nominated as supporting actress, and she won for it in supporting. So it's like the Big 4.5, not quite the Big Five.
the big 4.5.
Right. I think,
if you will.
I think Kramer versus Kramer is probably the most obvious parallel to this film in terms of the subject matter, in terms of the kind of prestige behind it. This was a very Oscar-y movie. But it's really interesting to watch those movies side by side because, A, like Kramer versus Kramer was the highest grossing film of 1979. It made it made like $180 million at the box office on like an $8 million budget. Marriage Story, very economically made, 18 mil, but it was released on Netflix. So like its worldwide gross was like $2 million because they had to put it in some theaters to qualify it for Oscars. It's just so funny how two movies that are so similar are treated completely differently because of the eras that they were made in.
Yeah. It's so easy when you're in the world of film to be like, oh yeah, you know, the Marvel movies are making $1 billion. And even, you know, before the pandemic, something like Jojo Rabbit might make $200 million. But like, let's just talk about this for a second. The fact that they released this in like 1% of the normal amount of theaters a movie would be released in and still made $2 million off of it. That's so much money. You and I will never see $2 million in our life. And yet this movie was released in like 5 theaters and made $2 million. That's so much money.
You know what? Let's go ahead and dive in on the money thing. I've heard you mention money multiple times on this podcast already, so it must be bill paying day in the G house. But
hey, man, all I got to say is it's absolutely crazy to think about how much money movies make.
It is. And how much they cost it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, like how much they cost to put together, how there's 50 million people. I mean, that was in our Oscars episode. We talked about like credits and how people wanted to be credited for the work they did on movies. And there's a reason, like when you watch Lord of the Rings, there's like 19 minutes of credits. And like all those people had to be paid. It's just crazy to me.
So the reason I bring up the money thing is because I think one criticism of this movie that it wasn't really a criticism, but like people have to be pissed off at every movie for some reason. And the reason people latched onto this movie to be pissed off about was that the main characters in this movie are well-to-do people. Like he is a theater director. She is an actress who has been in his theater troupe, but had a career of her own in LA before they got married. And so they have resources, they have money, and a lot of people kind of pushed back on this movie as it's not about real people, it's not about normal people, it's about rich people fighting in court. And I really do think, Brad, that undersells this movie a lot. Like, and I think that they go to pretty great lengths to portray them as like, yeah, he has a grant that he's running his theater company with, she's making money as an actress. But even for them, divorce is draining their bank accounts and it is like crippling financially. And I actually found, despite what they do for a living, that didn't really have anything to do with the subject matter of the movie. And I think it actually kind of helped further emphasize that point of like what divorce will do to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the money that was concerning me there. For sure, I think one of the drawbacks of this movie is how wealthy they are. And it's hard to understand how difficult it is to get divorced when you're not wealthy. But what I think that they draw out really well is that it doesn't matter if you have money or not. Like, pain is pain. Mm-hmm. And I think that something that I heard once said, funnily enough, at a marriage retreat, was that everybody might enter into the school of suffering through a different doorway, but they all end up in the same school. And I think that is kind of a good quote to illustrate what you're talking about. Like, they might have entered into the school of suffering through a very wealthy background where they have money, where they have prestige within their respective fields. They seemingly have it all together. But when you boil down the human experience, money doesn't change the fact that you can suffer. Mm-hmm. Money doesn't change the fact that you can be angry at your soon-to-be ex-wife. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what this movie really hits the nail on the head with, is the raw, pulsating human emotion of like, I loved this person and I don't even know them anymore. And it's just brutal in that way.
So I do want to kind of pull back a little bit, because I think that anytime you're talking about a movie with subject matter like this, you're really going to turn off people from wanting to go see the movie just because of the subject matter in general. It's hard to watch people go through a divorce. Who wants to do that? That is not an entertaining thing.
Oh, dude, I am in.
Oh, man, give me a bucket of popcorn. But I kind of want to draw a comparison to something that we mentioned in the episode we did about Schindler's List. And gosh, saying that.
The other movie that...
And the thing we said in that episode was that despite the subject matter, it was a benefit to the movie that Spielberg was making it, because he has just every bone in his body is like a showman, right? He knows how to deliver a good old-fashioned entertaining crowd pleaser. And even when the subject matter is incredibly heavy and the point of the movie is to make you think on something, the way that he uses his filmmaking toolkit to make a movie is still in like the most efficient, economical, in some areas entertaining way. And like, we were surprised when we watched Schindler's List that there were so many jokes in it. Like, you don't think about that when you're looking at the cover of the movie and reflecting on the horrific things you see in there. And I kind of think Marriage Story is very similar in that way, Brad. Like, it's got a lot of classic Hollywood in its bones. Like, the Randy Newman score is just very Hollywood. And there are so many jokes, there are so many gags in this movie that keep as much of it light as it possibly can until it needs to be serious and needs to be emotionally impactful. And I really appreciated that on this watch through. It wasn't like this dour, downbeat experience for the sake of being dour and downbeat. And the fact that they kept it light in certain parts really helped the emotional scenes, I think, hit harder for me.
Yeah, Bob, I think that that's really the beauty of this movie. I don't know, man. I think that more than anything else, this movie, more than any one we have ever reviewed, feels like a stage play. I'll take that back. 12 Angry Men literally was a stage play. So that one might be a little bit more, but that's from season 1. So that's way too long ago. This movie, like, it feels like I'm sitting in a theater watching a live theater troupe perform this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and
like the way the sets are built, the way the dialogue is delivered, it has that old Hollywood feel to it, and I think it does because old Hollywood was built around the idea that human emotion and human longing and desire was enough to entertain someone. And you really get that played out in this movie.
Well, one thing that this movie does really well is it really emphasizes the absurdity of divorce. And I don't mean like divorce as a concept, but like once you decide to go through with it, it's just very awkward for everybody all the time. And it's awkward in ways that, like, when you step back and you're not in it and you're not feeling all the emotions and you're just watching it from a remove, they're very funny things to watch. And there's so many interactions in this movie that are just genuinely funny. Like, I took a note that said, this is a funny movie. And it's not something I expected to write down when I went to turn this movie on again. But even towards the end of the movie, their son Henry is visiting Adam Driver, and, he's based in New York. The family had lived in New York, but now, because of a number of complications, Scarlett Johansson's character is working in LA, and he went out there with her, the son did, and now they've established residence in LA, so Adam Driver has to fly back and forth, and he's getting an apartment in LA, and the son comes over to visit him, and at some point, the son happens to mention, does Adam Driver have a girlfriend? And he's like, no, what are you talking about? Does your mom have a boyfriend? And the kid's like, well, I don't know. And it just cuts back to Adam Driver, and he looks so confused. And it's such a funny little punchline of a moment because kids say stuff and they don't know what they're saying. But Adam Driver is feeling all kinds of conflicted emotions. And at the very end of the movie, after all of the divorce proceedings have been finalized, Adam Driver goes to the house where the kid is now living because Scarlett Johansson wins custody, and they're all going to go out for Halloween, and they have a coordinated, everybody that lives in that house is going as the Beatles, and they tell Adam Driver, I guess you could go as a ghost, we'll cut holes in a sheet. And it's a metaphor. Do you get it? Right? Like, he is now like an invisible presence almost in this kid's life. But the visual punchline of all of them walking down the street as the Beatles, and he's just following them dressed as a ghost with a sheet on, it's genuinely funny. And there are so many really good, maybe not laugh out loud, but chuckle worthy moments in this movie.
Also, the fact that their son, Henry, is dressed up as Paul, and Paul is dead.
Hey,
and there's a ghost following him around.
I'm sure that's the point of that. Yeah,
100%, man. Hashtag Paul's dead. I think the other part for me that was like kind of absurdly funny was the first Halloween when they're literally fighting over the fact that Charlie brought him a Frankenstein costume, and he's going as the Invisible Man. Mm-hmm. But Charlie wants to go, is it a Power Ranger or a ninja?
Yeah, something like that. I think it's a ninja.
He wants to go as a ninja, and like Charlie and Scarlett Johansson are fighting over what their child is going to go as. And it's just kind of darkly funny. Like, when you're getting divorced, these are the things that you debase yourself into fighting about. Mm-hmm. And it's just like you said, it's it's just absurd. And there's like the things you find yourself arguing over in the midst of a divorce, you would have never imagined, a year or two before when you were, maybe happily married.
Right. One key area where this movie differs from Kramer versus Kramer is that in that movie, Meryl Streep's character essentially abandons Dustin Hoffman and their son for like a year. She just says, I'm going to go find myself. See you later. And it ends in this very bitter custody battle at the end of the movie when she comes back. And that one's much more like courtroom focused than this one is.
Like and Atticus Finch?
not quite that much, but, similar.
Okay.
But this one, I really appreciate that someone made a movie where two people are getting divorced, and from the beginning, both of their intentions are, we want to make this as amicable as possible. Because it is so easy when you are making a play, a movie, a TV show about divorce to get into like histrionics with it, to overact and make everybody scream at each other in a courtroom and point fingers. And even though this movie does have those kind of like emotional blow-ups behind closed doors, I found it really interesting that the characters' motivations pretty much throughout the film were, I don't want to hurt this person. I just need to be away from them now.
Yeah, and that's why Laura Dern is the worst human being on the planet.
Laura Dern's character is interesting. Let's talk about her. We have not gotten into the cast yet, but Laura Dern is probably the person we should talk about first because she won this film's sole Academy Award for supporting actress. And this was, I think, pretty widely acknowledged, Brad, as an award that was given to someone that everyone likes working with and who deserves to be recognized for her body of work, if not for her best performance ever. Like, she's very good, and I love Laura Dern, but even watching this movie, I'm like, I don't see why this performance wins an Academy Award. You know what I mean?
Do I ever, Bob? I was looking at the stories surrounding Marriage Story, and I found out that Laura Dern won the only Academy Award for it, and I got so angry on the inside because I don't like Laura Dern ever since she was in the episode 8, the Last Jedi.
Oh my god! Disliked
her.
Get
as
over
an actress.
it, dude. Get over it.
But here's the thing, dude. She got an Academy Award for playing a sleazy lawyer.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't you give one to Ray Liotta? He played a sleazy lawyer. He did a great job.
Yeah.
Like there was literally nothing about her performance that was impressive in any way.
So, I mean, I disagree. I think that everyone in this cast, like top to bottom, is excellent. Like, this movie features incredible performances from everyone. Even like Alan Alda, who's in the movie for 10 minutes as the nicest lawyer you can imagine. He's so good. And he's doing like a very different brand of Alan Alda. You can tell he's kind of like feeble. His character's supposed to be kind of old and weak, and he's playing that really well. Ray Liotta, really, really good. I think Laura Dern is fantastic in this movie, but you're right, Brad. Like, I just don't know what distinguishes her from sleazy lawyer number 2 in any other movie. Like,
well, and that's what I'm saying. I think you could have replaced her with nearly any other middle-aged actress in Hollywood, and they would have turned in just as good of a performance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't like playing that game necessarily. I guess I'm just saying, like, the character itself. It's not that it's underwritten, but it's just that there are no shades to it.
Yeah,
it's not a complex character. I think I agree with you, but for different reasons.
Which is what leads me to, how the heck did she win an Oscar for that performance?
I don't know, man.
Like, it was fine. She was a sleazy lawyer. Like, I didn't like her, and that was the whole point of her character. But, yeah, I don't know how she won an Oscar for it. Secondly, if we can get into just the world of the movie for a second, Nicole is the worst for hiring a lawyer. She is the villain of this movie. 100%.
See, this was going to be my next question to you. So I am in a different spot. Not that I disagree with you, but I'm in a different spot just in general about, does this movie have heroes and villains? And part of it is because I just know that I've probably seen more divorce movies than you have, Brad. And something that we've commented on throughout the history of this podcast is that pretty uniformly, like, movies have main characters who are men, and men provide the point of view for most movies. And I mean, it's just a fact, right? And when I hold this movie up against like a Kramer versus Kramer, where both leading performers are excellent, and Meryl Streep does her very best to give like shades of gray to a character who acts way more selfishly than Scarlett Johansson does in this movie, it still kind of falls flat because they really, like, on the page, they make that character do something so villainous and so unforgivable that it's like, I don't care what your reasoning was. I can't let you back into the world that I've seen with Dustin Hoffman and his son. In this movie, I think you have to keep in mind that it's written from kind of Noah Baumbach's point of view. It's, he says it's not autobiographical, but you write what you know, right? Like,
dude, he has a really good quote about that. He said, it's not autobiographical, it's personal. And I think it's really important that we understand the difference between those two.
It's autobiographical. Yeah. that's you deflecting, Noah. But so I will say, like, I think that there are times when this movie tips a little bit too far in favor of Adam Driver's character, not necessarily absolving him for what he did, which is you find out he cheated on her and like they were already having marital problems and that pushed everything over the edge. And I think when you kind of keep that in mind, you realize that you came into this movie midstream. Like you're watching Scarlett Johansson's reactions to finding out some devastating news, essentially.
Don't you mean in media res?
Yeah, there you go. But anyway, all that to say, like, I think that if you look at this movie without keeping in mind the timeline that they're proposing, the context around it, sometimes it does seem like she is a villain, but I actually really respect that this movie finds ways to balance out both sides of the scale, that he clearly did some things that were wrong, that she clearly did some things that were wrong. And at the end of the day, they also both have very admirable traits in each of them.
Well, and I think that they justify her actions in two ways, one that I like and one that I kind of dislike. The first way is that they set Nicole up in such a way that it feels like she's almost bamboozled into hiring a lawyer. Mm-hmm. You know, like her one friend, I think she's at like a yoga class and her friend's like, oh, you need to talk to my friend. She got me through my divorce. And like, then there's the meeting with Laura Dern's character. And she's just this, I mean, from the audience's view, I think you can tell that she's sleazy, but she's just this comforting shoulder and, you know, I'm just going to help you and it's going to be calm and casual and good. And she basically seduces her into hiring her for her divorce. And so like that part of it, I was like kind of okay with. But the part that I didn't like is that they play her mom and her sister as so ditzy that I feel like it's implied that she also is kind of ditzy and,
I didn't get that at all.
Just this. Oh, yeah, dude. She's just this teenage girl who, you know, starred in some sort of sex comedy. And now she's trying to prove things to herself, but she's actually not that smart. And because of that, she got hoodwinked into hiring this lawyer. And the rest of the movie, her character is just kind of like, just playing like this innocent, bumbling girl who's like, well, I don't know. That's just what the lawyers say to do. And I'm like, I don't think that's the right way to portray her.
Wow. I don't think I could disagree with you more strongly on that because they do talk about that a lot, that throughout her career, she has had to fight against the perception that she is ditzy because she was in this teen comedy and that she is subservient because she joined his theater troupe. And I think that they do a really good job of kind of fleshing out the background of her character. And if there is somebody in this movie that ends up ultimately being the more immature one, it's Adam Driver. And the funny thing about it is too, like, even though as an audience member, you may be tempted to sympathize more with Adam Driver's character, I want to talk just briefly, Brad, before we go to break, about the kind of now famous blow-up scene where, you know, it's been back and forth between lawyers and you see that neither one of them intends for anything to happen, but the lawyers keep doing things because they're on the defensive and now they feel like they have to be on the offensive. And Scarlett Johansson comes over to Adam Driver's apartment and they just say like, hey, let's try talking this out as adults. And it ends up in this like calamitous breakdown or blow up rather. Mm-hmm. And you see that when the arguments start coming out and you get deeper and deeper and deeper towards the root of what was causing their marital problems, she finally confronts him with, you cheated on me. And his response to it was like, I was young and I was in my 20s and I was hot stuff and I could have cheated on you so much more than I did. And she's like, you are so selfish that you don't even understand how selfish you're being right now. And he loses it in that moment, and he jumps right to like, I wish you were dead. I wish you would get hit by a car and die. And it's like this real primal emotion, and Driver's so good in that scene. But I think it illustrates that like deep down, he's kind of still a child. Like he's been given a lot because of his talent, and he doesn't know how to express himself. And he clearly thinks a lot of himself, and he's been masking some arrogance. And I just love the way that scene is written, because it's as much about what isn't said as it is about what is said. And he doesn't really have a lot of good arguments when you get down to it. He did something that was really, really selfish and immature. And he, for most of the movie, has not been willing to confront that immaturity.
Well, the interesting thing is that in the midst of this argument, the whole movie has been showing you that Nicole has felt pressured to do what Charlie wants to do. But when you break down how Charlie feels, like he casually mentions in a moment, like, I didn't even know if I wanted to marry you, mm-hmm. but he felt pressured into marrying her. And so there's this sense that like, he doesn't see things the way she does. She has seen this, and everyone around her has seen her as the one who was pressured. But all along their entire marriage, they never confronted the fact that Charlie felt like he was pressured into it. And so like, it's those moments that I think that this script really illustrates the depth of human trauma, that until we're willing to be honest and vulnerable about how we feel shameful, like I'm sure Charlie a million times over felt ashamed that he wasn't sure if he wanted to be in this marriage. And instead of confronting that shame with vulnerability, he hid it. He kept hiding it. He kept pushing it back. And it led to all these blowups. It led to all these places where he pressured her to do what he wanted to do because he felt pressured in the first place. Yeah. And so I think that's the beautiful thing about this script is whether you like Charlie more or you like Nicole more, you begin to understand how shame and hiding leads to this collapse of a marriage.
One more thing before we go to break, because it reminded me of this. The first time I watched this movie, Brad, I think I cried at 3 different points. And we will get into talking about the Randy Newman score and how that manipulated me into crying at 3 different points. But the first time, it was just in the middle of the movie and it came out of nowhere. She's bought herself a house because she's started making money from this TV show she's in LA. And her power goes out and her gate outside won't close. And so she calls Charlie because that's the only person that she knows. And again, it's such a lovely touch how like the absurdity of divorce, right? Like they rely on each other even as they're in this bitter court battle. And he comes over, she remarks about how his hair's getting long. Can I cut your hair? And they cut back inside and she's snipping his hair. And then they're finally closing the gate and Nicole's on the inside of the gate on one side and he's on the other. And they just do this really brilliant back and forth editing as they look at each other with a longing in their eyes, and they just don't say the words, and then the gate closes. And it is just a beautiful visual metaphor for everything that's happening in this movie. And I can't help but think that if these two people would have communicated with each other more, that like they would not be in this situation. And it so perfectly illustrates the importance of sharing your feelings and your thoughts and your emotions, and how leaving things unsaid is what leads to that resentment and that bitterness that ultimately grows. And how at so many points in this movie, they share these looks where you can tell they just want to say, I love you and I miss you. And they just can't bring themselves to do it. It's heartbreaking, but it's so well done.
Well, and they do that from the very start of the movie. The first, 6-7 minutes of the movie is these 2 monologues of Charlie and Nicole talking about what they love about each other. And then you find out that that's a letter they wrote, in response to a psychiatrist asking them to write it. Mm-hmm. and Nicole won't read it.
Yeah.
She won't read it in front of him. And that right there, the fact that she will not be vulnerable with him is, and not just her to him, but he also won't be vulnerable with her. That's the reason they're getting divorced. Mm-hmm. And they tell you that, Noah Baumbach tells you that from the very start. I will say, you're going to hate me for this, Bob. That scene where they were cutting back and forth with the gate slowly closing was the one scene of the movie where I was like, oh, this is just cheesy at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely on the nose, but it got me.
It got me so on the nose, man.
I love it. I don't know why. I am one for cheese, I guess.
I think that if it had just been like a shot of Nicole's face, Charlie's face, Nicole's face, done. Or even just Charlie and then Nicole, like just a one cut thing, I would have been down with it. But it went back and forth. Like 5 times.
It definitely did.
And I'm sitting there going, okay, bro, like you're really into your own filmmaking right now.
All right, man, we are running way over. Let's try this Dalmore 12-year. What do you say?
Let's get to it, Bob.
All right, so today we are checking out a 12-year single malt Scotch whiskey from the Dalmore. We have never had... Go ahead.
Did you just decide that this was going to be a season of Scotch? I'm really getting curious at this point.
Every season so far has been the season of bourbon, and we had so many Scotches on our shelf that people have donated to us and asked us to review. And then we ended up striking a couple partnerships with Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. And I was like, you know what? Like, let's just freaking do it, man. Let's knock all these Scotches out.
Dude, all I got to say is after the final 6-7 weeks of season 4, I was ready for a change, man. So I'm grateful for it.
You certainly got it, Brad. So this is the 12-year from the Dalmore. We've never had a Dalmore product on the show before, and this is a great place to start because it's essentially their entry-level product. They have a line of whiskeys that they call the Dalmore Principal Collection. It has the 12, the 15, the 18, and the 25-year-old expressions, and then there's 2 others that are non-age stated. So as I've said, this is a 12-year single malt. For the first 9 years that this is aging, Brad, they age it in ex-bourbon barrels. And then at the 9-year mark, they take half of it out. They put that into ex-Oloroso sherry butts, and they age that for 3 more years. And then they marry it all back together again. So you've got this nice mix of ex-bourbon with just a touch of sherry to it. This is a Highland Scotch. Brad and I love our Highland Scotches. Glenmorangie, our favorite brand so far. So
let's go.
We're going to see, man, if this Dalmore stacks up to it. What are you picking up here on the nose, Brad?
It has a pretty potent nose. For me, it was a lot of chocolate and almost like an overripe orange. And little hints of coffee on the back end, which that might have just been like a dark chocolate cacao kind of feel. But for me, it kind of do you remember those chocolate, dark chocolate oranges, candy type of thing?
Yep.
It kind of reminds me of that, but if you had an overripe mandarin orange inside.
This is really interesting to me. I think that this is probably the Scotch that I would say has the most influence from the bourbon barrel that I've ever smelled. And it's not like it smells like a very bourbony whiskey, but there's just so much really nice dusty oak on this. It reminds me a lot of the nose on our Watershed pick. I talked a lot about that sawdusty kind of funkiness to it. So again, I'll throw back to Willett products. This has a little bit of that on the nose for me, Brad. I'm really excited to see where this one's going to go. I'm going to give it an 8.5 on the nose.
Bob, all I have to say is if you ever enter the world of male dancing, your name needs to be
Willett
Dusty
Funk.
Oak.
I thought it was going to be Willett Funk.
Willett Funk would be a good one, but I think Dusty Oak.
Dusty Oak. What's your score on the nose, Brad?
I'm a little cooler than you. I'm going to give it a 7.
All right. Well, let's see if we meet in the middle here on the taste.
Yeah, when I get into the palate here, the orange really comes through firmly for me. It's a little bit nicer of a flavor than I got on the nose. But then there's some really nice baking spices that kind of pair with a bit of vanilla that I think we're getting from those bourbon barrels. It's a pretty nice taste here. I like it a little more than the nose. I'll give it a 7.5.
This one definitely isn't as soft as most Highland whiskeys that we've had. This is way more potent than any Glenmorangie we've had. And it reminds me, it's like if you mix together the Ardbeg Wee Beastie with a Glenmorangie. Like it has this really nice tip of the tongue, front of the palate note of some of that like sawdusty with that chocolate you were describing. And then in the mid palate, it turns into that kind of bitter barley flavor with a little bit of smoke to it. And, usually Highland scotches are not super smoky. So that was kind of surprising. And on the back of it, it had some of that aggressiveness that we got on that Ardbeg Wee Beastie. This one drinks pretty hot, Brad, and I was kind of shocked at that. I'm not a huge fan of the flavor profile here. I think I'm just going to give it a 6.5 on taste.
Well, and then we get into the finish, and I'm kind of getting a little bit cooler again on the finish. For me, this is where the coffee really comes out, but also a lot of that bitter. I'm glad you used the word bitter, Bob, because for me, it kind of is. It feels like a bitter orange. I will say I'm impressed that they kept that orange flavor throughout from nose to finish. Well, my finish score, I'll give a 7. I think it's a pretty well-balanced whiskey all around. They keep all the flavors they want in front of you the entire time, so I'll give it an 8.5 on the balance. But yeah, the finish just is kind of bitter, and it's not bad. It's just not my preferred palate profile, I guess I'll say.
So I'm drinking this one live, which we don't typically do, but, screw it. Like, I'm going to drink it while I'm on air with you. And sip number 2 was significantly better than sip number 1 for me. Like, some of that sweetness lingered just a little bit longer. But no matter how many sips of this I take, it's very clear that there's like a dividing line on my tongue where it's nice and sweet. It's got some honey sweetness to it on the tip of my tongue. And then at the back of the palate, there's no more sweetness there. It's not quite as smoky. Yep. It's not quite as alcohol, like astringent. But I just wish there was more of like a flow between the sweetness and then that kind of bitter finish instead of like the slammed door that it kind of has on my palate. So on the finish,
I'm going to go for the slammed door method here.
On the finish, I'm going to give it a 7. On the balance, I think I'll give it a 7.5. You're right. It's not poorly balanced, but it just doesn't quite seem to have like a flow from, one moment to the next.
Now, here in the glorious state of Ohio, you can buy this Dalmore 12 for $65. And if I'm being honest with you, Bob, that's starting to get into the range of like, I'm really paying attention to whether or not I want this whiskey. Mm-hmm. And so for me, there's nothing bad about this whiskey. I genuinely enjoyed it to a point. But at $65, I think I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Mm-hmm. There's nothing overwhelming about the whiskey to really make it worth this much. And with some of the other, Highland whiskeys we've had, it's not a bad value. I genuinely don't think it's overpriced, but I don't know if I'd recommend it.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 5.5. I'm pretty much right there with you. It's not necessarily like a poorly priced whiskey, but I would say that it's a below average value, if that makes sense. And I don't really know that I'm going to explain it any more than that, but if you catch my drift.
And that's all I have to say about that.
So I'm coming out to a 35 out of 50. This is exactly where we usually start recommending. Yeah, it's worth trying. If you're at the bar, you want to try something new, it's definitely worth it. I don't think I'd recommend a bottle of it. Brad, where are you coming out?
Bob, I'm at a 35 out of 50.
Hey, there we go.
Look at us.
I think it's a perfect score for this whiskey, man.
Our palates have finally merged. 5 seasons in.
We have created the unholy love child of whiskey drinking palates here.
We officially have the film and whiskey palate now.
Yeah. All right, Brad, so would you recommend, yes or no?
Same as you.
Yeah.
Try it at a bar. If you like it, buy a bottle, but otherwise, maybe pass on the bottle.
Well, as we celebrate the marriage of our palates, Brad, it's also time to mourn the loss of another marriage. So let's get back into talking about Marriage Story. What do you say?
Let's get to it. All right, everybody. That was the Dalmore 12, a part of their Principal Collection, a whiskey that Bob and I were above average on. Does that sound about right?
That sounds perfect.
Well, guys, we talked to you a little bit earlier about the Patreon content. And for today's episode, if you subscribe to our Patreon, you will get to hear Bob and I talk about the importance of relationships. And, we're going to answer the question, like, what does Marriage Story have to say about divorce as a whole and its effect on people? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Subscribe if you want to hear that content. But for now, we are going to do my favorite segment, 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Fact. Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver really got divorced. It was method acting.
They literally got married.
Just to get divorced.
Had a child, raised him till he was 8, and then got divorced.
True dedication to their craft.
It's Boyhood, but divorce version.
All right, man. I don't even remember what my record is at this point. I'm doing better than I am worse. That's all I know. So
I think so. I think you're like 5-4-1 or 6.
I'm pretty sure I'm like 6-2-1
No.
And we'll go back and check the record before we publish this. You're trying to add losses to my column. I can tell.
I'm pretty sure that you're getting closer to 500 than you think, Robert.
All right, man. Well, let's hear them.
Fact number 1. Nearly everyone who is anyone in this movie is divorced. Laura Dern, Noah Baumbach, and Scarlett Johansson are all divorced, and Adam Driver himself, the child of divorced parents. Fact number 2. All of the 3 actors who play lawyers in this movie appear in at least one film directed by Martin Scorsese. Fact number 3. This is Adam Driver's 3rd collaboration with Baumbach, the first being The Squid and the Whale, and the second being While We're Young. I missed the contraction there.
Huh. All right, number 3 is true. 2 and 1 are interesting. I don't remember Laura Dern in a Scorsese movie, but that doesn't mean she wasn't in one. She could have been in one in like the late 80s or the early 80s that I haven't seen. Like I've never seen his movie After Hours, which a lot of people love. Mm-hmm. So maybe she's in that, but I don't. Damn. Good one, man.
Hey.
I'm going to say 2 is the falsehood just because I don't recall seeing Laura Dern in a Scorsese movie.
Falsehood was number 3.
What?
No.
Really?
It was. Adam Driver has been in While We're Young, but he was not in The Squid and the Whale.
Oh, that you. Oh, man. Literally, I remember when I first started researching out this episode that he had been in 3 Baumbach movies, including this one. And I thought you promised me you were never going to get nitpicky enough that you would change only one small part of a fact to make it false.
So I'll say this. I went through all of Noah Baumbach's movies, and I only saw him being in While We're Young. So I genuinely thought that my falsehood was the 3rd and the Squid and it was kind of a pair between saying he's done 3 movies and Squid and the Whale was one of them.
All right, listen, this is coming directly off the Marriage Story Wikipedia. All right. Baumbach began to research the subject and met with 3-time collaborator Adam Driver to discuss the role.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm taking my point. Forget you.
So wait a second here. This
is like the 2nd or 3rd time you've done this, man. Come on. He was in Frances Ha. That's Baumbach. He was in Marriage Story, and he was in While We're Young.
So
you're technically right.
I'm technically right,
but you didn't do enough research to double check that you were right.
I will say I genuinely thought that I did do the research. I looked through all of his movies and somehow missed him in the Frances Ha movie.
There it is, man.
That's all my fault. What will this be another tie?
Let's call it a tie. A tie's not a loss. I'll take it.
All right.
Well, 2 facts and a falsehood, everybody. The belly flop of podcast segments right there. All right, Brad, before we wrap up for the day, sometimes we talk about music in movies on this podcast. I do want to talk about Randy Newman here because it's a really great score. And another thing that I saw people get pissed off about this movie with was that they thought the score didn't fit the movie. which I think is kind of bullshit. Like, I really think this movie is meant to be entertaining, and they thought the score was schmaltzy, and that's how Randy Newman makes music. But for me, this was Noah Baumbach trying to mimic the style of a Woody Allen movie. And we've never done a Woody Allen movie on this podcast, and we may never do one, knowing what's going on with Woody Allen now.
I don't think I've ever seen a Woody Allen movie.
Well, I mean, maybe we will someday, but it'll be a controversial one, I guess, if we do. But this kind of has the flow.
Patreon bonus content.
There it is. This kind of has the flow of a Woody Allen movie. They even mimicked like the kind of font that he uses in all the Marriage Story posters. And I thought that Randy Newman's score really kind of fit that vibe. But I gotta say, man, regardless of whether it fits the movie or not, it is like a main line to my emotions. And we talked about this man, Randy Newman, when we did Toy Story, and we talked about him when we did Awakenings. He just knows how to make scores that make Bob Book cry.
That's it, dude. And that's all you need. I think that's what he shoots for at this point.
Yeah. Like, if you wanted to develop some sort of chemical weapon, you really don't need to do that. Like, you put me in power and then you play Randy Newman music at me and I'm just like, I'll give you whatever you want. In any case, what did you think of the music in this film?
It was spectacular. I think that the best part of the music in this movie was when Noah allowed it to enter into the film and when he kept it out. There are times in this film where there is just raw, what feels like unedited audio of, when Nicole and Charlie are fighting, or when they're having a conversation with Henry, or little moments of the movie. And there needs to be no music. The focus needs to be purely on what the actors are doing on screen. And then there's other moments where you need that music to kind of sweep you along into all the feels that make Bob Book cry. And so I think that, if anything, it's not just Randy Newman that did such a spectacular job. It's Noah Baumbach's directorial decisions of how to utilize the music that really impressed me.
The final scene, I guess not the final scene, but one of the last scenes of the movie kind of brings everything full circle. It's when their son Henry accidentally finds the letter that Scarlett Johansson's character wrote about. And when that music kicks in and Adam Driver reads the line where she says, like, I fell in love with him the moment I saw him, and he starts crying, it's game over for me. Like, it's from that over. Moment to the credits, I'm just, and man, Adam Driver is so good in this movie, Brad. Like, we haven't talked about him.
He's so good.
I'm still pissed off that for some reason everyone thought that Joker was a good enough movie for Joaquin Phoenix to win an Oscar for, because Adam Driver he should have won Best Actor. I still think Scarlett Johansson should have won Best Actress for this movie. This, like, when you talk about dynamic lead performances, it's really hard to find a movie with a better lead actor performance and lead actress performance in the last, I'd say, 10 years than this movie.
Honestly, one of the only other ones I'd say, well, she's not even lead actress. I was going to say Scarlett Johansson and whoever played the small boy in Jojo Rabbit in the same year.
See, my pick for that one would be the girl in Jojo Rabbit, Thomasin McKenzie. Yeah, she's so good.
You're right. And those are two child actors. That's crazy.
And anyway, yeah.
Anyways, Bob, I'm with you 100%. I think that Adam Driver's performance is one of the best performances I've ever seen on screen. I don't want to get hyperbolic about it, but I've just not seen many people go to such a deep place of raw emotion as what you see Adam Driver do. Mm-hmm. And I think that early on I said that this feels like the most staged movie we've watched, that it feels like a stage performance. And there's just one of the reasons I'm not going to give this movie quite as high of a score as I thought I might have is because of how much it feels like a stage performance and not like a movie. And yet there's just something about Adam Driver in this film where I'm like, yeah, dude, he is raw and honest and open and vulnerable. And I love it. Mm-hmm. I think it's brilliant, man.
Mm-hmm. There are certain actors that are so good at playing regular guys You know what I mean? Like, if you put Leo in this movie, he's acting too hard.
Yes.
Like, it wouldn't come. You would just always have this sense. You could put Tom Hanks in this movie; it'd be the same thing. I think you could probably put Denzel in this movie, and maybe I'm just finding a way to say that, like, even though Adam Driver is a movie star, he doesn't have the like megawatt star personality, and that allows him to play these kind of roles that, you know, a Dustin Hoffman would play, or you know, I could see like a Robert Duvall playing this kind of character.
Dude, you know what it is? He's born in the Midwest, man.
That's what it is. These corn-fed boys, man.
That's right.
All right, man. I am ready to give my final score. The first time I saw this movie, I thought it was one of the best films of the decade. I gave it a 10 out of 10. This time through, Brad, I watched it in less than ideal circumstances. I got really sick last week and had to stop watching for a while, and I like my viewing experience was very broken up. But I still have to say, even with some of the flaws of the movie, the final half hour of this film is just perfect filmmaking, and it really re-elevated the movie for me. I was going to give it like an 8.5 or a 9, and no, like the ending is just so good. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. I think over the next few years, my opinion on this will really kind of settle into place, but after viewing number 2, I'm still at a 9.5.
I'm at a 9, Bob. I think that the reason I come down a little bit is that there's a few small moments, like at the gate, where I just feel like Baumbach is just showing off to show off. And I don't like that. It annoys me. So that gets a half a point.
That's the
ding
Midwest in you.
Right there. That's the Midwest in me. The other half point ding is kind of the same thing. Here's the thing about the theater scene that just drives me nuts. And we kind of encountered this when we reviewed Birdman. The theater scene is so damn pretentious.
Oh, yeah.
They just think they're better than everyone else around them. And you just get that. It oozes from this movie.
Which is, I mean, the good thing about it, though, is that, like, they build that into Adam Driver's character. Like, he kind of 100%. Is pretentious, and it's not a good thing.
And it's not a good thing at all. And when he learns how to be more down to earth is when, you know, he starts to be okay. Like, he moves... I didn't think about this before, but he moves from an immaculately created Invisible Man costume that was made by an artistic director, costume designer in New York, to a sheet with holes cut out of it. Like, he humbles himself, right?
Yeah.
But this movie still just oozes pretentiousness, and it drives me nuts. And so that's another half point off. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, Bob. It's a spectacular movie.
Well, we want to know, if you have seen Marriage Story, what do you think of it? You can reach out to us on our social medias on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Whiskey.
Or you can jump on our Discord. We are talking to Film and Whiskey Nation every single day. If you become a Patreon, you get your own special channel. There is all sorts of stuff going on there. Right now, we're talking about candy bars and which ones are terrible. So jump on in, get into the conversation. You can find a link to our Discord at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, Brad, we are going to be watching one of your last, I think, 2 movies for the season. We're checking out the movie Arrival from our friend Denis Villeneuve.
Bob, I have 2 words for you about that movie.
Is it Denis Villeneuve?
Denis Villeneuve.
I can't wait to do that repeatedly next week. So we'll see you next week for Arrival. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.